Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers about you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome on this wonderful Wednesday to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I know you're all very excited. You haven't heard me live here on Kentucky's Voice since the new year, since Christmas. So first, let me say, I hope you all had a great Christmas. Hope you all had a great New Year's. And I know you're all very excited. You're like, Christmas came a little bit late, but my gift is Andrew Cooperrider on the radio today. I know I'm very excited because it's an important time of the year. The legislature's officially in session, the Kentucky legislature, and it is an even year. That means our every 2-year budget is being made, and cuts have to happen. But I want to read for you a quote first to start us off, just so you can understand a little bit of where the Republicans in our legislature are sitting. This is a quote here. I'm not going to tell you who it's from first. I'm just going to read it. If you provide for people, and I don't care what people they are, then some of your social issues don't seem to be as relevant. I think if you cure more of the social ills and woes of society by creating educational and economic opportunities, people's differences aren't as pronounced, nor they as prickly when everybody is doing well. Now, you would think that might be a quote from like Zohran Mamdani from New York, or maybe Elizabeth Warren, or maybe just some well-meaning liberal maybe inside their mind. Some well-meaning liberal that thinks, well, you know, these social issues people are just focusing on because, you know, they're poor. And if everybody's richer, then you wouldn't care if, you know, kids are getting their genitalia cut off by their parents because they're encouraging them to think they're a different gender. Or you wouldn't care that people are killing their children in the womb, or, you know, you wouldn't care that, local governments are passing fairness ordinances that say that if you run a Christian childcare facility and you don't want to hire somebody because they're transgender and you're worried about having that around children, you can be taken to court for it. That wouldn't matter as much if everybody was just doing well. That sounds like a quote from a Democrat, but it's not. That is a quote from our Kentucky Senate President, Senator Stivers. He's in charge of the Senate, major role. Some would say he has more power than even the governor has. And so it leaves you to wonder, why is it that the state has such a hard time with our finances coming up? Because they want to cut taxes. They are doing a tax cut this year, but they also had a budget deficit. That means that the state, at the budget level, if we are to get another income tax cut on top of a lot of the other tax cuts we'd like to see, things like getting rid of property tax, well, the state's going to have to cut what it's spending by a fair amount. They're going to have to cut about $1.5 billion from their budget this year. And of course, there's been a lot of saber rattling. Now, earlier this year, or last year, I guess, technically, you had Jason Petrie. He's head of the House Budget Committee, so he's the one who's largely guides the budget, and he got into it with the governor's administration over them withholding financial documents. And I'm told they played this video at the caucus retreat before session started, saying that, you know, we're going to be holding Beshear accountable. But here's the thing, Beshear's boondoggle empire, the reason why the legislators, and I doubt they'll do anything about it, and I hope they prove me wrong, but the reason why is because, as we just saw, in large part, they agree with it. In large part, they love to see the spending. They believe it is their role to provide for people. That's what they think the government's role is. You heard it there. They call themselves mountain Republicans. I would just call them Democrats that, maybe aren't as loud about, the social issues per se. But they call themselves mountain Republicans. And they're the ones leading the legislature right now. And so it does lead to a lot of conversations about where we're going to make cuts at. Well, I've got a few ideas where they can make cuts at. We're going to talk about on today's show. If you want to join into the conversation, feel free. Shoot us over a text message. In the last segment, I generally talk about them. That's 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. Send over your texts. We'll be back here in just a short minute.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you are back here on Kentucky's Voice. Short break for you. Andrew Cooprider, your host for the day. Join into the conversation. Shoot us over a text at 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. And if you like what I'm talking about on today's show, feel free to watch and listen to the Andrew Cooprider Show right here on 970. You can catch it Sundays at 6 p.m. Now, back to what we are talking about here. The budget. It's time to make it. And how much are they going to spend? Well, I said in the last segment there, I was dubious over the idea that they would cut anything. Why? Well, history tells us all the Republicans in our legislature know how to do is spin like a drunken sailor. Let me give you the evidence here. So back in 2022, so you understand how our budget works, right? So our legislature has a 60-day session on the even years and then a 30-day session on the odd years. Simple enough to understand. And on those even session years, they make a budget for the next 2 years. So when we look back to 2022, comparing it to 2024, our last two budgets, what do we see? Well, between 2022 and 2024, the Republican legislature, Republican with an R, raised total spending by more than 16%, adjusted for inflation. 16% increase in spending. And that's right in line. And it's not just federal government sending in dollars. The general fund spending, which is the money that is completely up for grab for the state to go ahead and spend how they want, also increased by that same number, adjusted for inflation. And of course, we have a balanced budget here in Kentucky. It's a part of our Constitution. They cannot spend money without taxing it. That means necessarily, some way, somehow, they have gotten 16% more money out of your pocket, out of my pocket. I find that to be unacceptable. But here's the thing. A tax cut is taking effect here starting this year. It will lower their revenues by $700 million. On top of that, there was a budget deficit or a revenue deficit where revenues were lower than expected by about $200 million. So that puts us at $900 million. On top of that, if they want to get to another income tax break, which they claim publicly they want to, But if you talk to people like Osborne and Stivers privately, they kind of sort of admit we're never going to get to 0% income tax. They don't actually think we're going to get there. This is just something they throw out there to, of course, get voters all excited to continue to vote for the same thieves that are reaching into our pockets. But anyways, if we add all that together, if they want to make a cut again, they're going to have to cut spending by about $1.5, $1.7 billion a year. So the question becomes, well, where can they make the cuts? Now, there's little things here and there that they spend money on that's a waste. We'll get to some of those items today. But one of the big places where I posit we have way too much being spent is on our economic development. Maybe you saw the press release from Andy Bashir. He's very excited to announce that we've had our second best or third best year ever for private investments at $10 billion newly invested right here in Kentucky. Now, you might think, wow, that's pretty exciting, $10 billion. That's until you start drilling into that investment and how much of it is your money, is my money. Because if we just look at economic tax incentives, leaving out what's called industrial revenue bonds and TIF financing, we see that they gave away $1 billion in economic development funds. What is that used for? Those are tax breaks. Those are direct cash. For an example, you have things like the grant and aid training, which gives up to $75,000 to private companies for them to train their own employees, paying for 50% of it. If you listen to my weekly show, I addressed this last week, but just to mention on that real quick, $75,000 for a company to train their own employees. They'll cover up to 50% of the training costs, max $75,000 to a company, unless they get a special carve out, like, the millions that went to Ford. But anyways, putting that to the side, we just spent millions of dollars of taxpayer funds training the same people, the same 1,600 people they just laid off. But, whatever. That's a real win, isn't it? If you want to join into the conversation, once again, that's 502-571-0970. Deal with your comments there in the last segment. But regardless, they shell out money for these trainings. That really, what company is like, I'm going to pack up and leave unless you keep giving me your $75,000? It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous giveaway. It's unnecessary. But yet they continue to do those kinds of things. So that $10.5 billion, $1 billion of it directly subsidized by the state through tax incentives. Then when we throw in what's called industrial revenue bonds, for those of you unaware of what that is, quick explanation for you. If you know what a government bond is, it's where the government issues a bond, they issue debt, and then the public can purchase it. But by purchasing it, you get a return. You get paid the interest, but you get a tax incentives for that interest. So, for example, the income can be tax-free, and so it encourages people to buy bonds from the government. Well, they do something where they offer these plans to the private companies, where private companies can go to the government and ask them to issue bonds on their behalf. And a lot of times it deals with special tax incentives being offered to the company, and then the bonds get offered, and people can buy those up, offering financing to these companies without having to list stock on the stock market, diluting their shares or losing their shares, or having to go to a private banker, and they can pay much lower rates just because of the simple fact that those who buy the bonds, the returns, the interest they earn on those bonds is tax-free. They get the same tax benefits. So not only are we offering an incentive to the company when we do this, but we also are offering an incentive to the private bankers or the equity funds or whatever, security funds or individuals that are buying up these bonds. They are also not paying the income taxes they'd normally pay on those earnings. And when we add that in, out of that $10 billion, the state government itself subsidized $2 billion of that 10. That is before we get to the local giveaways. Like, for an example, we talked about this on the show with Churchill Downs, getting tens of millions of dollars in property tax abatement. We have those kinds of deals being cut constantly, where they give away, well, you want to pay local property tax. Or that's without counting things like, for an example, in order to attract in a data center here to Louisville, giving them a 50-year sales tax exemption. When we start adding up all those exemptions and this money here, that money there, and then we start adding in the federal government benefits, out of that $10 billion of private investment, You subsidized half of it. Is that how we should be building an economy in Kentucky? By subsidizing 50% of what private companies are quote-unquote investing? Do we now get to own 50% of their companies? Of course not. Of course not. But yet we continue to dump money there. They got to cut, like I said, they got to cut 1.5, 1.7 billion. Maybe you start looking at your economic incentive packages. Now, people who defend them would claim, well, Andrew, if we don't, pay the piper, well, then the companies will go elsewhere. They'll move away. And this might be a hard concept for some people to understand, but I want to try to explain this as clearly as I can. And I might have to go into the next segment to explain this, but why does the government care? Unless we have particularly high unemployment in an area, why does the government care? Why is it their role at all? For an example, the state government, their stated purpose, the legislature, if you talk to the leadership, they'll tell you when their stated purpose is to grow the population of Kentucky. Why? Now, they'll tell you, well, it's because, if we grow more people, we can grow our tax base, and then we can offer more services. First off, I think you do too much. I think you spend too much already. Here's the second thing. If you can't provide basic services for 4.5 million people, what makes us think they can do it for 5.5, 6.5? And I'll tell you a little secret, a little dirty little secret. If you go to the states that have more people like us, like Tennessee, like Florida, like Texas, even California, their politicians are talking the same way. How do we get more people into the state? Now, California does, activities to run them away. But at least what they'll vocally give attention to is this idea that government has to be driving population into an area. Your local cities do this. We have to drive population. We need to grow Louisville. We need to grow Lexington. Why do you care? I know for you, it's because if you make more money and you got more people to control, that makes you feel a little bit more powerful in the morning when you wake up and put your shoes on to go lord over the rest of us. But from a proper role of government side of things, why does the government even care what the population is of a city or what the population is of a state? And then when it comes into job side of things, when it comes to whether or not we need the jobs, that's something else to look at these economic deals of, because we got to find this money. If you want to join into the conversation, feel free, shoot us a text, 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. We'll be back here in a few short minutes to talk about these cuts that need to happen.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you are back here on Kentucky's Voice, your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider, your Wednesday host here on Kentucky's Voice. We are discussing, of course, the state budget because it is that time, that year to make it. And one of the things we were calling out here, by we, I mean me, was calling out here was the massive amount of spending we do on economic development. Now, defenders of this would say, look, if we don't offer it, they'll go elsewhere. And then, we don't get the jobs. And I brought up the fact that why is this government's concern in the first place? Exactly. Unless you have massively high unemployment, where you're talking like massively high. But they'll bring jobs into areas that don't need. For an example, take this Ford battery plant. At the time when this was penned, it was 2021. So keep in mind, we're still kind of in this weird COVID, unemployment, recovery unemployment, maybe people staying on unemployment longer than they should, a time of our economy. And even at that time, when they were bringing in this project to Hardin County that was going to provide 5,000 plus jobs, the amount of people unemployed in Hardin County was 2,200. 2,200. That means that they're bringing 5,000 jobs where only 2,200 people were even, quote unquote, looking for a job. And that was probably actually much lower. Several of them would probably go get jobs. And more importantly than that, Hardin County had a 2-to-1 ratio of job openings to unemployed. So they already have 4,000 open jobs, only 2,000 people to fill the 4,000 open jobs. And the government comes along and says, you know what you need? Would really solve your problems is another 5,000 plus jobs. Now, of course, defenders say, well, people move into the area and then that helps grow the area. Hardin County is not a small county. I could hear an argument if you're in like a smaller county or a smaller city that there's a certain rate at which you kind of hit a break-even point. Like if you've got to cover a certain amount of area, you have to have police and fire to cover that amount of area. But if you don't have enough people to pay the taxes, then it can be hard for you to provide those services, police, fire, those kinds of things, roads. But Hardin County is well populated. If it can't handle its county budget, its city budgets with the amount of people they have, they're never going to be able to handle it. Period. But yeah, hey, we're going to bring in all these jobs. And also, what that does, one of the defenders said, well, because a $30 an hour job is better than a $15 an hour job. Is it? I mean, I know that's like a crazy thing, but is it? For an example, I would rather make $50,000 a year and live in rural eastern Kentucky than make $100,000 or even $125,000 a year living in New York, for an example. Because of cost of living, because I can buy a home in eastern Kentucky, a pretty nice home for $200,000, $350,000 even. I can get a good chunk of land with a pretty nice home. But in New York, $200,000 gets you a closet, if they even sell anything for $200,000 there anymore. So the point is that no, making more money isn't necessarily amazing. But also don't mistake saying you don't want more money, you want to buy more things. So for an example, take Hardin County, you have this plant coming in. Housing became super expensive. A lot of people building, we'll see what happens there now. But land became expensive, housing became expensive because the demand for housing, because you decide to move in thousands more people into an area, and that demand grew, meaning the cost of housing grows. And so now suddenly, well, yeah, instead of making $20 an hour, I'm now making 28. Great. But your house costs twice as much. Is that a win? That kind of regional inflation? And then, of course, because you're bringing 5,000 jobs into an area that already had 4,000 open jobs, so you have 9,000 jobs trying to be filled by 2,000 people, everybody, restaurants, fast food places, Walmart, all those places have to raise what they're paying people per hour. That means the goods and services you now purchase also go up in price. And that's something that I think is a basic idea that a lot of these government planners don't understand. People don't want more money. They want to be able to buy more things. Would you rather have $300 today or $100 back in 1910? And if you don't know how to answer that, you need to go look at an inflation calendar, because I promise you, you'd rather have $100 back in 1910. It went a lot further. So anyways, their economic development is an issue, but so is a lot of their boondoggle spending. They spend a lot on crazy, out-of-this-world things. And they also do things like giving out $75 million a year in incentives and investments to the Kentucky through the Kentucky Entertainment Incentive to radios and TV shows to be filmed. For an example, this year, like last month, the state awarded $1.1 million to 1,000 Pound Sisters Season 7. 1,000 Pound Sisters. Now, I don't know about you. I've only seen clips from the show. I'm sure people watch it. They might find it endearing or something. But with the show title like 1,000 Pound Sisters, I have to assume it's not really painting Kentucky in the most positive light. Are people watching 1,000 Pound Sisters over in, I don't know, Nevada, Florida, and they're watching it and they're like, that seems like a state I want to visit. I love 1,000 Pound Sisters. I can't wait to go to their small town in Kentucky and just look at things that these heavy-set women have been to, these obese women. Of course not. That's not contributing to our economy. That's not doing, and then people will claim, well, you know, they're bringing jobs, though, into the area. Are they? We give them $1.1 million. How much do you think TLC spends producing a season of a reality TV show? I looked this up. It's between $3 to $5 million. So let's even go to the high end, $5 million. We gave them $1.1 million. Is your assertion that somehow, some way, 20% at least of their production budget ends up in the coffers of the Kentucky taxpayer? Or into the coffers of the state from the taxpayers? 20% of a production budget? If the state is siphoning off more money than that out of a production budget, maybe instead of handing out tax incentives, you should just lower the taxes for everybody involved. If you think on $5 million spent to put on a production, I'm going to end up with over $1.1 million, you're taxing us too darn much. Way too much. But instead of lowering taxes for all, they're going to continue to give out these special little giveaways. Because, look, it doesn't really put a notch in your belt to say, oh, look what I did. I went ahead and I built I built up several small businesses. 5,000 people now own small businesses in Kentucky. You never hear them talking about that. Never hear them talking about how many Kentuckians have moved to being able to work for themselves. You never hear them talk about how many Kentuckians are able to break free of any kind of quote-unquote corporate structures or anything else and be able to get out there and work for themselves. That's never an accomplishment you hear them talking about. They never talk about the small business owners. What they care about and what they talk about is how many big corporations we can get in, then how many of you worker cogs, because that's how they see you. That's not how I see you. I see you as an individual and a person. They see you as a cog in the system, as a wheel. How many of those worker bees can we get employed to go work for one of these corporations? That's not it. That's not the only thing I want to talk about. Here's something else we spent when we'll spent money on when we come back. $85,000 we spent on a dating service for people with mental and intellectual disabilities. $85,000. We'll talk about that when we come back. If you want to join into the conversation. In the final segment, I'll go through your text. You can text us in here at 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. Join into the conversation. Talking about the budget, talking about cuts that need to be made. Important stuff, I know. Things that are near and dear to your heart. And if they're not, they're near and dear to your pocketbook. So you better start giving a few cares about it. Because if you want to keep more of your paycheck, you got to start holding these people accountable. But we'll be back in a few short minutes here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you are back here on Kentucky's Voice, your host for the day, Andrew Cooper, talking through some of the things we spend money on that we shouldn't, because it's especially pertinent as it is budgeting time. It's time to budget. It's time for the legislature to decide how much of your money they're going to take out of your pocket. And we're discussing a little bit about economic development. One thing I want to touch on, and I know some of you will have opinions, so feel free if you want to join in to the conversation. Text 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. Few of you have sent in text. We'll be dealing with those next break. But what I want to discuss here, this $85,000 going to, and I'm not kidding you, a contract to a group called Independent Seekers Project in order to create a advocacy and sexuality initiative, which included creating meet and mingle events monthly. That was part of their contract. They had to hold meet and mingle events monthly. And the contract specifically is to provide funds to identify and support a system that supports people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities to access and participate fully in their communities by implementing the Advocacy and Sexuality Initiative. So, we put together the name, like words matter in government. And the fact that this is called the Advocacy and Sexuality Initiative indicate a few things. And the fact that they're holding meet and mingle events monthly as a part of their sexuality initiative, I think it's fair to say that we're spending $85,000 to help people with so that people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities have sex. I mean, that's what they're doing. And, I posted about this online. A lot of people commented. A lot of people took issue with it, mostly because they're communists. But, I guess if anybody disagrees with me normally is a communist. But I'm just kidding. But a lot of their comments centered around a few ideas. First, that people with intellectual mental disabilities are people too, and they have sex as well. Okay, that's fine. I'm not sitting here advocating that for some reason we should pass a law making it illegal for those individuals to have relations. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't spend $85,000 trying to ensure that it happens. Okay? Some of the defenders of this said, well, look, they need to learn about, sex and sex ed. I'm maybe I don't know, but I could have swore that we have a health class in school, a health and sexuality class, quote unquote sexuality, I guess you'd call it, but a health class that goes through all these things in our K through 12 education system. If for some reason they didn't get that in K through 12 education system, and I know there's a lot going on there, then maybe we should be looking at that of making sure we get a health teacher in there to talk to them, if that's what needs to happen. But spending $85,000 to hold meet and mingle events doesn't sound like how we're going to do our sex ed. I guess that's a little bit of, just throw them in the deep end, they'll figure it out type situation. And quite frankly, the problem I have with the sheer I had 748 comments on this post, and the majority of the comments were from people defending it, saying that I'm a eugenicist and I hate people with disabilities because I don't want to spend $85,000 of taxpayer funds on meet and mingle events for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. But last I checked, it's not eugenicists. It's not that I hate those people. I also don't want the government spending $85,000 on straight meet and mingle events or gay meet and mingle events or any other kind of meet and mingle events. I just, for some reason, call me old-fashioned, think dating isn't really the importance of the government. But these people disagreed. They think that's a great place to spend money, and this is going to be part of the problem. Because whether I'm talking about an $85,000 dating service, whether I'm talking about $2 billion in economic incentives, there's always going to be a defender for these programs. They're always going to defend, without fail. Every time I talk about a program or something we're spending money on that we shouldn't, there's people who defend it. But once again, going back to what I started with, we have got to find $1.7 billion to cut. $1.7 billion has to be cut. And if we can't even agree that $85,000 being spent on dating services is a little outside the realm of what's important right this second, then how are we going to come to a conclusion on what we should be cutting? I think this deals a little bit with us individually. I mean, even when I talked about us spending $7.5 million on grant and aid training, which is where, once again, we give cash to companies to train their own employees. People defending that. That's very important. We need to be paying for half their training. If we don't, they will leave. Once again, no company's leaving over $75,000 they're not getting. But regardless, maybe you want to jump into the conversation. You can text 502-571-0970. Speaking though of accountability, going into bills filed, we have this out of Fayette County. Representative Burke, Democrat, filed a bill first day. When the first bill's filed, she felt it was super important. She filed House Bill 12, which would let lawmakers and their immediate family members demand that the government agencies scrub personally identifiable information from public records, including who they or their family members work for. Let me tell you why this is such a problem in case you already don't know. So we recently had an issue that I exposed going on in northern Kentucky, where Kim Banta, who's a Republican out of northern Kentucky, state House rep, she voted for this bill that gave, and several bills, that gave $150 million to this Covington Life Science Center. The property that was sold for this Life Science Center, the manager of the Life Science Center, as well as one of the pharmaceutical companies inside the Life Science Center, Bexion Pharmaceutical, her husband owns a portion of. She literally voted to send $150 million to companies that she and her husband will directly financially benefit from. Directly benefit from. Under this bill, it is public record who owns a company maintained by the government. So if you want to see who owns a business, you can go on to Secretary of State's website, you can search it out, and it'll show you the officers who filed it, who owns that business. Under this bill, a legislator could request that their husband, their kids, their immediate family members, people who even live in their household, that information could be scrubbed from that public record. So the next time that they vote to send $100 million to some private company for some initiative that they think sounds really good on paper, and then their spouse owns a portion of it, or owns it, or their child owns it, we wouldn't know. This is what this Democrat, Representative Burke, felt was so incredibly important, was that we need to hide. One of the first bills she filed, we need to hide who we work for. That's the opposite of accountability. That's the opposite of transparency. There would be next to no way to trace now how certain votes and certain initiatives may be directly financially benefiting legislators and their families. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound good to you? You joining the conversation, 502-571-0970. Speaking of accountability, in case you missed it too, the Herald Leader is suing the governor. They asked the governor for his past official calendars, as well as the calendar of Lieutenant Governor Coleman, as well as the calendar of Rocky Atkins. They wanted this calendar because old Beshear's traveling an awful lot. For example, he has a weekly show on Sirius XM. We know at least once he traveled to New York to film that. He posted about it on social media. We don't know where he films that at exactly. Is he filming it in New York? Is he filming it in Kentucky? Who knows? He's traveling a lot because we know he wants to be president. And the question becomes, who is meeting with these people that you need to meet with? Who's running Kentucky while he's gone? You can do a lot from a phone, but when it comes to how do I negotiate these deals, well, it's awfully hard to be negotiating these economic incentives while you're, out of the state. And there's cause for concerns because his former economic development cabinet secretary, who negotiated the Ford deal under his dad's administration, was told to recuse himself by the Ethics Commission, was told to recuse himself from any dealings with that property, specifically in Hardin County, because he owned a property near it, a commercial property worth millions, that'd be worth a lot more if they end up getting the job done. So the Ethics Commission priorly said, hey, you shouldn't be involved with the project. Did he recuse himself from the project when it came time to negotiate? No, he didn't. Why? Well, maybe it's because Beshear's traveling so much that he needs these people with direct conflicts of interest to do the job for him, because he's not here to do it. Coming up after this, we'll be digging into your texts, your messages, the things you guys send over. Feel free, shoot us a text, join into the conversation, 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on this final segment of Kentucky's Voice. Your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you check out the Andrew Cooperrider Show. You can listen to it right here Sundays at 6 p.m. Sundays at 6 p.m. Tune in, take a listen. We've been talking today about budgets, what we're spending money on, crazy things like that. And generally in the last segment, I will take your text messages and work my way through them. If you want to join into the conversation, you still have time. Go ahead and text 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. You can join in here. Let's start working through it. Let's see what you guys had to say about today's topics here. So this person texted in saying, the jobs have to be for those, I'm gonna summarize what they said. The jobs have to be for people in the state, not to being more, not statism. Okay. What they're saying is that jobs that we bring in, as we're worried about jobs, because early on we were talking about what is government's roles when it comes to jobs. In large part, they're agreeing with my point that the state bringing in these companies and these jobs that we don't even have enough people to fill means that we're using your funds, our current taxpayer funds, to attract in companies to then hire people that don't even live here. And I can't think of a more perfect example of this than the Kentucky Entertainment Incentive Program. Like, we don't currently have really a film industry in Kentucky. We got a little bit of one, but not really like a large one. There's a few movies that have been recorded here, obviously, but not like a huge one. But when people come in to shoot, they don't really hire a lot of locals outside of like extras or something. Here's a fun fact. I was on an episode of Pawn Stars. It was being filmed here in Louisville, and my wife and I were bored that day, and they paid us $150 each to go be an extra on Pawn Stars. I didn't even need the money. It was just something to do when there was nothing to do. They'd also fed us lunch too. So free lunch, $150 each. Wasn't bad. Those were probably mostly Kentuckians taking part in that. Though I got to tell you, looking at the production crew, the people making the real money, they weren't from Kentucky. They were obviously from elsewhere. They're obviously from LA, Hollywood, California, wherever. And here's the other thing about the movie industry is we're talking about bringing jobs in for Kentuckians. Every state wants movies to be filmed. I think it's just because governors and legislators love being like, yeah, I was a part of that. Maybe I'll get to go on set. Maybe I'll get to meet Kevin Bacon. Maybe I was just thinking of him because I think he was scouting out a spot, or Ethan Hawke or somebody was scouting out a spot in Kentucky to film something. So maybe I'll get to meet him. Maybe I won't. But, it's a notch in my belt. But as far as economy building goes, the film isn't here to stay. You got to keep basically making nothing off them if you want them to stay here, because they'll go to Atlanta. And then as soon as they get better incentives somewhere else, they'll go there. And as soon as they can get better incentives from Nevada, they'll go film there. As soon as they can get better incentives from Texas, they'll go film there, or Tennessee, or et cetera, et cetera. They are happy to get up and move because their productions aren't permanent. They can have them anywhere. Justified, a show about Kentucky, was filmed in California. Even shows about Kentucky don't have to be filmed here. And if we're not continuing to basically make nothing off these handouts, then they will go elsewhere. And importantly, so they're not contributing to the economy. And if we do build jobs here that people move for, we're importing what, Hollywood culture? No thanks. You can keep that. I prefer the rural Kentucky culture over anything California has to offer us. But also, when they bring in these other jobs that are more than people in the area can even employ, and they're trying to drive in population by just saying, we'll create a bunch of open jobs. So you're reaching into our pockets to benefit someone else? We don't even benefit from. How do I benefit? How do I benefit if somebody from Tennessee moves to Kentucky, or somebody from Mississippi moves to Kentucky to work a job opening we have? How does that benefit you? How does that benefit me? How does that benefit any single Kentuckian in this state? It doesn't. And that's the point Texter's trying to make. Someone else texted in. I'm assuming this is about the $85,000 spent for the dating service and sexuality advocate, and the 85 grand we spent so people with intellectual disabilities have relations. They said family should care for family issues. Government has usurped the role of family and church in many ways. I agree with you. I also think in large parts we have handed that over. I think in large parts the church has handed that over too. We saw a lot of lobbying from churches, 70s, 80s, 90s, for government to get a lot more involved with what would be church's role, like, for an example, private charity, like, for an example, food banks, those kinds of things. There's something to be said. The fact that the church doesn't do the welfare programs anymore is really a huge detriment to us because the shame has gone away. See, if you lose your job or your family falls on hard times and you need to go down to your local church and ask for help, you have to look your friends, your family, your neighbors in the eye and tell them, I've fallen on hard times. And there's a redeeming quality in that, but in doing that with the shame you feel, shame can sometimes be good, that then motivates you to move away from that position, to move to a point of prosperity so you can hand out to other people, so you can take pride in what you've accomplished. But when you're just getting your money by getting a deposit in the bank account, you don't have to look anybody in the eye, and you don't have to feel shameful about the fact that you can't provide for your family on your own. It doesn't really exactly encourage you to go out there and get a job now, does it? It doesn't encourage you to move to a point where you can take care of yourself. And I think that's more than just the family and church needing to step in and the government taking over those roles. I think also in large part, it's led to this continuing of people on welfare because they don't have that shame. We got a few more texts here. If you want to join in, you still got about 5 minutes for the show's over, so feel free to text 502-571-0970. 502-571-0970. And our text here says, our local news stations are doxing Metro Police by putting their name and photo on TV when there's an officer-involved shooting. These officers are innocent and are only doing their job to protect our community. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of strange point there, right? You have a point. I understand that you may, you have a point. Is we know what people do with that information, I guess is what we're saying here. Maybe they did everything perfectly right, but this person's going to get attacked for it. I remember there's a story here in Louisville regarding a officer issuing a illegal camping or something violation to she said she was pregnant. I guess she's pregnant homeless woman. And that officer involved in that got skewered. But when you watch the body cam and you understand what was going on, you realize what the officer was doing was trying to hold the woman there until EMTs showed up. So he finds this pregnant homeless woman who he's seen many times before sleeping on a bare mattress under an underpass, probably doing drugs while pregnant, probably not doing that well. You're homeless. You're probably not taking care of that pregnant child, that child inside of you. And so the officer said, well, let me call EMTs for you and we'll get you checked out. And she tried to leave. She tried to get up and be like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to leave. And he said, no, you're being detained for illegal camping. You need to wait for the EMTs. And then the EMTs he didn't say wait for the EMTs. He's like, no, you're being detained. Then the EMTs show up, offer her care. And now he still issued the quote unquote ticket because he kind of had to at that point. You can't pretend like, well, I'm detaining you to get you in trouble and then say out loud because I want to force you to get medical care that you don't want. That would be a violation of generally what people would consider a violation of rights. Of course, our courts would call it that. I mean, I would say you're protecting the rights of that child to be born and live healthily. But anyways, But our courts might look at that and say, well, you can't force a person to get medical care they don't want to have. And so what they were doing was trying to detain this woman so she gets the medical care. Maybe you guys remember this story. But that officer was just slaughtered online and just talked so bad. I don't even know if he still works. And he's probably one of the better officers that really cares, that was trying to do what we all would probably say is the right thing, the same thing you all would probably do in that situation if your hands were tied in the way his were tied. And yet they publish it and put it out there. But at the same time, there is a problem with, they are government officials. Of course, their information is publicly available. They have their badge numbers and their names on their uniforms. If somebody wants to make a complaint about an officer, they have to know who they are. But I think there should be, to your point, I think there should be better protections for these individuals as far as it goes. I think that'd be a better route. We got another text that came in. Sorry. This one says, now government determines what is shameful and has none. I think what they're saying is that because what I was talking about earlier, where the church was and family has governments usurped the role of church and family, that people don't feel like shame anymore about what they're doing when it comes to the welfare programs, and that shame can be a good driver for you to get out there and do things. And they're saying that because the government determines what is shameful, I think they're saying that nothing's shameful because the government's determining it, because the government has no shame. And in large part, the government doesn't. Government does a lot of crazy things. I saw the story here, and I know it's a little off topic, but I just saw the story reminded me of shameful. We have this visa offered for entertainers, for people with exceptional talent that we offer out there. And apparently applications have increased tenfold, and there's a lot of people coming in on this visas. A majority of them are OnlyFans content creators. So they're porn stars, and we're offering them immigration visas for exceptional talent. And, some would say that's pretty shameful. Well, that's what, I got one more here that called me a loudmouth. Well, I'm not yelling. I'm just passionate. I'm very excited about what I have to say here. I'm excited to be with you. Don't let that deter you. I'm here every Wednesday. Keep listening. You may like what I have to say. Hopefully you learn something. But, Kentucky's Voice will be back tomorrow. I'll be back next Wednesday. Until then, we'll be seeing you.